We're into the pursuit of truth. So just a few more to go of these. I think this is the one I was talking about previously about the laws, and I think it's actually the one I'm going to play after this, about UK, US could be complicit in war crimes if they are seen to be supporting Israel and they commit war crimes, which I guess in the future they'll be talking about the siege, the electricity, gas, water being turned off, whether people died because of that, starvation, whether hospitals were unable to do whatever they needed to do, and that may, well, the Geneva Convention makes it quite clear that you're not allowed to do that, and I assume that's where international law is from. Also whether on purpose or not, targeting of Gazan civilians. I mean, if you know that Hamas is a terrorist organisation and you know that they use them as human shields, that doesn't then give you carte blanche to just go in and shoot them. You can't call that collateral damage when you know full well that that may be what's being done. Yes, I understand it's very difficult then to kill the terrorists because that's that makes it very difficult, but that doesn't. I don't think the international law allows you then still to just drop bombs on civilians. Of course, that may not be what is actually happening. We don't know because we're not actually there. We're relying on Israel, Hamas, and the Western media to tell us what's going on. So each one of them has their own agenda. So how to find the truth out of all those different stories is a very difficult one. And you could easily be led down a certain avenue based on what you're being told. So I guess it's very difficult. But anyway, here's some more of these to show how humans deal with conflict and war, and how if we're left to live in this system of greed and possession and money and dividing us all up rather than us knowing collectively that we are actually one, this is what can happen and why we should move away from that kind of system.
Northern Gaza, all this time frame issued by Israel has now passed, and the Israeli military gathering on the board. Bose Bismuth, who is a member of the Israeli Knesset, joins us now from Tel Aviv. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. I hope you can hear me all right. So this safe passage window, another 6-hour time frame for northern Gazans to move, has now elapsed. What happens now? Is Israel going to send in its ground troops?
Well, I cannot reveal to you all the developments that are going to occur in the coming hours, days, but what I can tell you is how this dreadful, horrific story started and how it will end. How it started, we all know, all the world has seen, those outrageous, pictures, images, videos from our cities, from our communities, from our kibbutz in the South Country. But as you're asking, how it will end? It will end by the fact that Hamas will not exist anymore as an entity. And please, there will not be any more this difference between Hamas, like the political side organization and the military organization. This is a terrorist group. And when it will be over, it will not exist.
Right. Well, you are saying you will target Hamas, but innocent Palestinian civilians are going to get caught up in this, aren't they?
So only to remind you, of course, that we in Israel never targeted civilians. This is not our aim. Let me remind you what happened last week. Let me remind you that maybe the world should understand exactly, and I'll give you some more details about last week, that the first round of violence that occurred is those military soi-disant, which were professional in brackets, terrorists, who came in order to slaughter. These are fighters. This is what we speak about human rights, and we speak about international law. These are the fighters that they have. They are now a second round, and in the third round of the things that happened last week in our southern border, were also civilians from Gaza who came, and survivors from this massacre, because it was a massacre, heard noises of women and children or teenage from Gaza who came to steal from houses, and they participated in all this. So let me remind
women and children again getting caught up in the retaliation, though, aren't they? And we've heard from the Palestinians that 28 medics have been killed. So
I would only tell you one thing,
the innocent are being targeted by your retaliation.
I would expect anyone in the world, anyone from the free world, anyone from Great Britain, from France, from Italy, from America, from Australia, from Canada, anyone right now, after a week from this dreadful event, to feel compassion, sympathy, and feeling that this war that we're entering now in Gaza is also your war, because this is a war between the free world, between human beings, between people and beasts and animals. And when I say that, I'm too cruel to beasts and animals. So nowadays, I mean, on the contrary, you should be on our side, backing us and expecting us to finish with this Hamas.
If you want to crush Hamas, why haven't you sent troops in yet?
Sir, on the contrary, we're a very serious country with a serious nation, with a serious military. And maybe, and let me also remind you that in my country, where I come from, missiles protect people. Over there, people or civilians protect missiles. And maybe we're responsible. Maybe the first desire of a country like ours, when your daughters are being raped, when your kids are being burned, when babies are being burned, the first thing you would like to do is, of course, a sentiment of revenge. Yet,
the Israeli stranglehold on Gaza is causing a humanitarian crisis which will exacerbate, won't it? If the troops go in, there's nowhere for the Gazans to go. They can't get out if the borders aren't open and the hospitals are full. So what happens to those needing help?
So I would only answer you, first of all, as you mentioned now, humanitarian crisis, I would ask you, first of all, how would you define what has happened last week? How would you define all those terrorist attacks that our people, have lived with for so many years? How would you define that? And would you agree, by the way, and you're now interviewing me from Great Britain, do you agree with me that when, for example, England throughout history was attacked, the first thing that you had in mind was victory, especially against vicious forces? Because you have to understand one thing. Me now, never in my life, I was born in Israel 59 years ago. For me, never again is something that is from the history books. Never did I thought that I would say never again about an event taking place in my free, independent, strong
Mr. Bismuth, can I please put something to you from the Archbishop?
And in order to prevent, I have the moral duty to protect my kids, to protect the kids of Israel, to protect the women of Israel. No women in the world should be abused.
Mr. Bismuth, can I just put something to you from the Archbishop of Canterbury, quoting him? I plead the sins of Hamas are not borne by the citizens of Gaza. This action will not be proportionate, will it?
I will only remind you, when you speak of proportional reaction, then of course you know what would be. Proportional reaction is me now permitting 2,000 Israelis to go inside and slaughtering Gazawi, including burning babies. Is that what you want? Proportional response? Of course not. We are doing it because we're a serious rule of law, a serious army, but we are obliged. This is something that we have to. We promise security for our people. And as I said before, never again.
Well, you couldn't protect your people. This attack by Hamas came without notice, without warning. Have you failed the people? This attack came without warning, didn't it? The intelligence agencies didn't predict it.
Look, I will not hide to you that what has happened, something did not function, something big did not function. This is obvious. How can anyone say something which is different? Yet, right now, the moment is for unity, and the moment is for victory. And also, I would say responsibility, but especially unity and victory. And I see unity in our nation, and I see the victory coming, and it's very big.
Could you apologise? Would you apologise to your people then for failing them?
Every funeral I go, and this week what I do is I go to funerals, another one and another one and another one. And I go to see families who lost their loved ones. And I see images that I never in my life want to see. I see this father of this girl who went to a music party. She went to a music party. That's her fault. That's her blame. She went to have fun. She's 24 years old and she's beautiful, like every girl in the world. And that poor father tells me that if he wishes his daughter to be now in Gaza, being abused, and he's the father. He prefers his daughter to be in Gaza abused rather than dead. And the next day I have the unfortunate message that his daughter is dead. So of course, we apologize to every family. And by the way, in our country, in Israel, every family of a victim, every family of someone whose kid has been hijacked, of course, is entitled to say whatever he wants, and we are here to serve him and to promise him to do everything we can.
Okay, Mr. Bismuth, We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Time has beaten us, but I appreciate you coming on to the programme.
One last phrase.
Thank you very much.
One last phrase. Difference between this cycle of violence, which is war, and the precedent others ones, is this time we will not have a stopwatch, and we expect also the international community not to have one. We have to finish Hamas this time, once and for all.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
The thing is that the media, they always will play devil's advocate,
particularly from the American side, but
with this, and when it's an Israeli, they talk about, or let's talk about the bombing of Gaza. When it's the Hamas of Palestine, it's like you do condemn the massacre. They like to play that game, riling up each side. I suppose that's. I suppose there wouldn't be any point of creating an echo chamber of them just all agreeing on things, but just to hear it's difficult for us in the West who are not involved in this. To feel that the hurt and hatred that is coming out from both sides because of what they're facing. Okay, now about international law.
Understand, if you break the law, action will be taken.
A group supporting Palestinian rights has written to the Prime Minister outlining its intention to prosecute UK government officials for their approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict. The International Centre of Justice for Palestinians says that the UK government is aiding and abetting war crimes in Gaza. Well, we can speak now to their co-director, Crispin Blunt, an MP and former chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. Very good morning to you, Mr. Blunt. This is an unusual position, isn't it, for you to be in, to be writing to the Prime Minister and saying you could be complicit in war crimes?
Well, it's the Prime Minister of whom I'm an enthusiastic supporter. And I'm not entirely sure that my colleagues have quite grasped the legal peril that they are in, or fully understand the international law in this area. You can't encourage powers to commit war crimes, or indeed, if the United Kingdom is not, as other members of the international community ought to be, pointing out to the Israelis that their actions are breaches of international law, breaches of the fundamental settlement that followed the Second World War, in detail, and what we're seeing on the television, but the forcible transfer of all those people is a direct breach of war crimes. Everyone must act to restrain people if you know it's going to happen.
Well, the government has said that they support Israel's right to defend itself.
Of course, but it must be within international law.
Okay, so where is the complicity here on the part?
Because if you know that a party is going to commit a war crime, and this forcible transfer of people is a precise breach of one of the statutes that governs international law and all states in this area, then you are making yourself complicit. And as international law has developed in this area, the fact of being complicit makes you equally guilty to the party carrying out the crime. And this is really this is now the last defense for Palestinians in this situation, is that international law will then begin to operate, make international leaders conscious of their duties under international law, and the fact that in the end, they can't ignore it. And they ought to be acting to restrain our ally from taking actions that are breaches of international law.
So that is what you're warning the Prime Minister, you're saying that is what he and other government ministers
it goes beyond,
must do.
It goes beyond government ministers. Indeed, any politician who is then egging in turn to Israel on to breach international law and support Israel in the conduct of this operation. Of course, our hearts will go out to the state of Israel and the people there for the appalling atrocity committed on it. But what we're not allowed to do is witness one crime being piled on with another, which is simply going to make the situation worse, but it's also fundamentally wrong.
So what you are calling calling on is for a change in language, or are you calling on the government not to be sending those auxiliary ships?
I think that what we would suggest to the government is they ought to be supporting the UN Secretary General's call for an immediate ceasefire and for getting aid and supplies into the beleaguered population in Gaza. And that needs to be the first action. This has got to stop because if you, in response to the atrocity of last Saturday, if the response is simply an illegal atrocity that is even worse in scale, where does this lead? And that's why international law is cast the way it is. And it's very specific about the actions required and the responsibilities engaged. And that's not just the responsibilities of the actors in the action itself. It's actually those who are encouraging them. In Israel's case, Israel has had a deal of exceptionalism and impunity from international law for a very long time now. And in the interest of us all, and indeed Israel itself, that needs to stop.
Very complicated legal arguments. Crispin Blunt, thank you very much indeed for explaining that to us.
Not complicated at all, though, was it really? These are the laws, and you have to follow them, and you can't support someone when they're not following them. So the only thing is you need to know what the laws are, which I assume any government involved in a war, taking part in it or supporting it should know. And therefore, if it's on there, then that's it. It's not complicated at all. Right, here's the next one.
Zero protection, as settlers called them, death to Arabs in Gaza, in the West Bank, and again, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship that have been sitting ducks. Israel has killed hundreds of Palestinians in the past year and a half in the West Bank.
Can I just ask you a question about...
And also claim terrorism.
Well,
so for you to say that
can I just ask you...
Mark, have
Mariam,
you ever been starved?
Can I just ask you...
Have you ever been starved?
One question. Can I ask you...
On purpose. On purpose.
Could I ask you one question?
Has your child been denied medical permits? Has your school...
Do Hamas represent... Mariam, could I just ask you, do you think Hamas represent the majority of the people of Gaza?
I think it is incredibly false and misguided for anyone to assume that Hamas was not birthed from the Palestinian people. These are not foreign fighters, unlike Israel that is calling the American army a foreign army to come and fight with them. Hamas was birthed out of the context and situation that was placed in. The fighters, which is Qassam Brigade, they're essentially youth that are, most of them are engineers, if you notice, and look at the history, that didn't find employment in
the point of my question, Mariam, the point of my question,
I am asking your question. You are interrupting me because you don't like my answer, Mark.
Okay. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to get an interview going, but...
No, you are
trying to... Mariam, I appreciate your time. We've run out of time. I'm so sorry we didn't have a better interview. Still looking...
See? That's how it is. They faded us
later. Is the government confident now that this is safe to put these...
I'm just going to pause that there. They didn't like what... He doesn't like it when someone goes against his confirmation bias or his worldview. Why couldn't he answer the question? It was quite a legitimate question that she asked him. Have you ever been starved purposely, or your child? Why was he afraid to answer that question? He's afraid to answer that question because then that would admit that what's being done is wrong. And you know it's wrong. Why aren't you saying it's wrong? Anyway, here's the next one. This is David Lammy. His was the, other than Jeremy Corbyn, probably the only person who's really talking about some of the truths.
A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Foreign Secretary. That's Labour's David Lammy. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says in the national newspaper this morning that there will be no resiling from support for Israel. Do you agree with that?
I think that must be right. Look, I'm thinking of Celine Ben Nagar, a young woman who should be completing her maternity leave and is a hostage at this point in Gaza, having left behind her husband and her new young baby. Israel has a right to go and get those hostages. It has a right to degrade the military equipment and rockets that have been used against it, to deal with the tunnelling of Hamas. And we must recognise that Israel is facing a huge existential crisis. 1,300 people dead, murdered, babies raped. And against that backdrop, of course they have the support of the UK government, and I would not seek to be partisan about that, except to say that it's hugely important that that is done, as Keir Starmer has said, along the lines of international law.
Well, let's address this, whether it's possible and how Israel might do what you've just said. Mr. Netanyahu says his war aim, he uses the word war, is to eliminate or eradicate Hamas. Do you think that is actually possible, to completely wipe out Hamas?
Look, I think the starting point for me is two important things emerged from the Second World War. The first was a home for the Jewish people following the Holocaust and the unbelievable murder of that community. And that is Israel, and that is why we defend Israel. The second thing was the rules-based order. A rules-based order that is currently under attack from dictators and autocrats across the world. So when he says he wants to root out
this prescribed, he says eliminate.
This prescribed terrorist group, war is ugly. It happens when diplomacy has ended. 1,300 people are dead. He is entitled to have his own operational desire to see an end to Hamas, and we support him in that.
Even if that operational desire leads to carnage that sweeps up all kinds of people who, by anybody's standards, are not part of Hamas?
No. We must distinguish between Hamas, a terrorist group, and the Palestinian people.
Okay.
And anyone who has seen the faces of bewildered children who have lost their parents, of people fleeing for their lives, of course, it is, I said, international law must prevail, and that means that you have to minimize civilian casualty, that people must have access to water, to medicine, to food, to electricity, and that there must be humanitarian corridors where people can pass without being bombed. That is the case in any war situation. Those are the rules of war. We have those rules precisely because of the Second World War and the way it was fought.
Foreign Secretary, this is very interesting because we haven't heard anything of what you've just said from the Israeli leadership. So let's just take that bit by bit. Is your overall point here that Israel must do what it must do, but it must do so with restraint?
I think that the international community, you've heard from Antony Blinken, Emmanuel Macron, Lloyd Austin, all are saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, but they are reminding Israel of those obligations. And why are they doing that? Because the truth is, Israel faced the hardest of choices, Were this the UK, 1,300 people murdered, a country invaded, of course, these are very tough choices. But we do not put... When you're a democracy, you do not put to one side the need to minimise civilian casualties.
I noticed in the list of countries you've just cited, Macron and so forth, you did not include our government. Are you saying that you think our government has been slow on the uptake? It hasn't said what needs to be said to the Israelis?
Trevor, I'm not coming on the show today to depart from the cross-party consensus that I think there must rightly be at this very serious and gravest of times. So I don't want to be critical of James Cleverly, and I'm very conscious that as the country's chief diplomat, he will be having private conversations with the Israelis, private conversations with Egypt next door, the Jordanians, the Qataris, of course the US, all in an attempt to minimize the loss of life and particularly civilian casualties.
You're trusting that he is doing all that can be done?
Well, look, I was grateful to have a Privy Council briefing earlier this week to bring me up to date. This is a difficult, stressful, delicate time, particularly for the Israelis, but we must hold dear. We must hold dear to the rules of war.
All right. Well, you've been unequivocal in your support for Israel. Let's talk about the impact of this situation here. Nothing obviously compares to what people in Israel and Gaza are going through. But how worried are you about the reported spike in anti-Semitic incidents in this country and the palpable fear that exists in the Jewish community that you've just referred to?
I am horrified that we have Jewish families deciding to take their children out of school, kids not wearing uniform, people that think it's okay to use the most awful slurs and hate against a minority community. And I say this representing the Stamford Hill area of London, which is a historic home for the Jewish community. And we must be robust, we must stand up to it. And it's important to say also that the hate that's rising across our country towards Jewish people is happening in a week where we come together to stand up to hate. This is anti-hate week in our country, and we should be concerned also about the rise in Islamophobia.
Let me put this to you, David, that people in the Jewish community will no doubt welcome what you said. But what we're hearing a lot is that in spite of the words, the actions and the demonstrations of support that might have been extended to other communities are not being extended to the Jewish community. And specifically, Friday, in last week, your football team, Tottenham's been absolutely down the line in its backing for Israel. You were vocal in your support for footballers taking the knee, LGBTQ diversity, Ukraine and so on. Was the FA correct to refuse to light up the Wembley Arch in support of Israel?
That must rightly be a decision for the FA. Had it been my decision, I would have lit up the Ark. And I think that across the world, you've seen public institutions show their support at that critical moment because of the horrific way in which this would have started. So I would have done it. But that must be a decision for the FA.
David Lammy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The problem is there's a lot of people can talk about the things from international law and whatever. The problem is who's actually enforcing it? We know international law has been broken. My understanding, the siege, the food, water, electricity being turned off is against the Geneva Convention. The moving of the people from one place to another is also and collective responsibility, i.e., civilians and Hamas getting killed in the same rockets is another one. So that's three already. Who's going to enforce them? The leader of the free world, Joe Biden? Don't look like it. Here's another one.
Under the torchlight in a city called Khan Yunis, an arm moves helplessly in the dirt and the rubble. The arm is attached to a young man who's been buried alive, a crowd of volunteers managing to dig him out. It's a victory of sorts, won with rudimentary tools, but there's little security here in southern Gaza. Israel told civilians to seek shelter here, yet this building was destroyed in an Israeli airstrike. With troops poised on the border, Israel has intensified its bombardment, with the consequences on display in northern Gaza. These neighborhoods in Gaza City have been reduced to rubble. An unknown number trapped within. Yet residents kept searching and digging for survivors. Here, a young girl is pulled from a mountain of debris as continuous fire lands among them. Many of the injured end up here. The 100-bed Adwan hospital has been turned into an extended emergency room, but that's not big enough. In distressing images, we see children being treated for blast and shrapnel wounds. The man in charge says he has another problem. The Israelis have ordered them to evacuate.
The brutal occupier told us we had to evacuate the hospital for humanitarian reasons. But that's a lie. Most of our patients are children. There are dead children here too. With our thanks to God, we're doing our best to help them survive their injuries.
Not enough beds, not enough supplies, and new stocks have been blocked by the Israelis. Here, a medic uses a nappy to wipe a child's wounds. And the people who run this territory, militant group Hamas, they've only offered words about steadfastness. Still, Dr. Hamad told us he's not going anywhere.
We will not evacuate this hospital. Our destiny is in God's hands, not in the hands of the occupier.
More than 1 million people have left their homes in the north, with many now camping in the city of Khan Yunis. But there is little to eat here and little to drink. This is our shelter, says a mother called Amel. 60 people are sleeping here. With little aid, they've been begging relatives for food, and no one has washed in days. It's a difficult thing to take.
I swear to God, if this war continues, if civilians and children don't die from the fighting, they will die from hunger. They want to kill us with hunger as well.
Food, food, said Mrs. Kaferna's baby. There's no food, she replies. A humanitarian crisis has erupted in southern Gaza. The innocence of youth, perhaps, the only source of hope. John Sparks, Sky News.
Well, announcing Joe Biden's plan to visit Israel, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the president would use the trip to reaffirm U.S. solidarity with Israel.
He's coming here at a critical moment for Israel, for the region, and for the world. And he's coming here to do the following. First, the president will reaffirm the United States' solidarity with Israel and our ironclad commitment to its security. President Biden will again make clear, as he's done unequivocally since Hamas's slaughter of more than 1,400 people, including at least 30 Americans, that Israel has the right and indeed the duty to defend its people from Hamas and other terrorists and to prevent future attacks. The President will hear from Israel what it needs to defend its people as we continue to work with Congress to meet those needs. Second, President Biden will underscore our crystal clear message to any actor, state or non-state, trying to take advantage of this crisis to attack Israel. Don't.
Only they can get involved, huh? I mean, I guess the thing is to think that, you know,
filled with potential coming into land and on board
is was unlikely, because we know how the West has acted in the past historically. even with Iraq and Afghanistan, with the fact that this Israel-Palestine issue is the two-state solution that Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat agreed upon, well, how many years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it is, never came to fruition because of whatever reason. I guess the West don't really care too much about, solving peace, because the West historically has been not really been the arbiter of peace. It's caused a lot of problems by splitting countries up and causing these kinds of things, and not pushing people. The problem is what the US and the West did in Iraq and Afghanistan, breaking international law themselves. What WikiLeaks showed, and they've been trying to get WikiLeaks leader all this time because of he showed them breaking international law, and the fact that Kofi Annan said it was an illegal war based on the UN resolutions they used wrongly, and the fact there was no weapons of mass destruction and all that kind of stuff. And they set a precedent of 9/11 of attacking countries for this, and now everyone feels that they've got the right to do it because the West did it, but the West were wrong when they did that. But these people, these leaders aren't sorting the problem out. They're just saying, please stop doing this, but they're not really holding them to account and saying, well, this is international law, you've broken it, stop it. Have a ceasefire. Turn on the water, electricity and gas. Bring in aid through Israel, not through Egypt. Because Israel are the ones who are responsible for this, and they have to take a duty. It shouldn't be the US doing it. Why are the US so involved? It's like they're the 52nd state. Here's the next one.
The Premier League action, live on Sky Sports.
Well, in the last hour, Gaza's only oncology hospital has said it has been forced to partially shut due to fuel shortages. Earlier today, the World Health Organization said there had been 115 attacks on health facilities throughout Gaza. Well, joining me now is Frederica van Dongen, the Humanitarian Affairs Manager for Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're watching these pictures from Gaza, you're hearing the reports, the difficulties of power, of fuel, of blood donations. How are you feeling about what you're seeing there?
Powerless. I'm in East Jerusalem. We as Doctors Without Borders, our colleagues here, we are so close to such an enormous humanitarian disaster. And where normally we would be able to respond, we're not able to respond to this because we don't have access to Gaza. We don't have the possibility to import the very much needed humanitarian and medical aid. And our colleagues who are in Gaza are very limited in being able to respond because it's not safe for them to respond.
So how are they helping? Because I was certainly told a couple of days ago that really the only treatment people are being offered now is stopping bleeding. The medical supplies are now so limited.
Yes, we already a few days ago, our stock of painkillers and anesthetics ran out, which is forcing surgeons to perform surgery without any kind of pain killing or anesthetic. So our colleagues share that they hear patients, people, children scream out of pain. It's a horrible situation, and what makes it much worse is that some of our Palestinian colleagues, they stayed in the north of Gaza to try to save as many lives as they can. At the same time, already since a couple of days since Israel's order to evacuate the hospitals, they are working with the fear that any moment the hospital that they're working in can be bombed. These are impossible conditions to be working in.
There's been so much focus on the southern Rafah border crossing with Egypt. I've just spoken to a regional director of the World Health Organization, suggesting that they had highest level meetings with the Egyptians and that they are ready to open the border, but still it remains closed. We know there's convoys on the south side. How keen are you to see that aid coming in from the south?
Very keen. Medical supplies there was already a huge shortage of medical supplies. a week ago, as I just described, very much limiting any doctor's ability to be able to respond. But now the situation that was created by Israel's order that over 1 million people had to evacuate, this creates such an unprecedented humanitarian need, because you must understand the moment that people leave their house, they become completely dependent on aid. Combining the situation that Israel has caused such a mass displacement of over 1 million people, while having this siege on Gaza, blocking the access of water, food, electricity, and fuel, blocking the access of humanitarian and medical aid to come in, it creates an impossible situation with extremely high needs and no way of the medical humanitarian actors to be able to respond to this.
So how would you characterize then the twin issues of blockade and the area being under attack from artillery and airstrikes?
We would characterize this as collective punishment, which is a war crime.
Frederica van Dongen from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, thank you very much indeed for your time. And obviously, I'm sure those people in Gaza would appreciate eventually when you are able to get into the strip to help them. Let us just bring you some new drone pictures that we've just received, actually, from Deir al-Balah. This is in the central Gaza Strip. This is showing the destruction of parts of Deir al-Balah after an Israeli airstrike which hit a house and destroyed it completely. We're also seeing pictures there of those gathering near the rubble of that house. And people uncovering bodies that were found in that property before burial. So some drone shots we're getting from central Gaza, from the settlement Deir al-Balah, once again seeing entire blocks destroyed effectively, and those who are rushing to help. We've known already that there is a shortage of equipment to remove the rubble, to access those who have died. We know there's a shortage of body bags, coffins. The means of burying people is also difficult, and there have been warnings today, critical warnings about the safety of water supply. Obviously, always when bodies cannot be buried, there are health concerns that go with it. So pictures there from central Gaza, once again showing a property which has been destroyed by, the suggestion is, an Israeli airstrike. More of those pictures obviously coming up in our...
Hey, it is as they had a call to azan in the background. And to prayer. I just don't understand how, listen to what Médecins Sans Frontières talking about, in the previous one of children, starving, and doctors, when they can operate, I'm sure there's lots that they can't operate on without antibiotics, anaesthetic. I mean, imagine that. It to me, it feels a little bit like we're watching the beginnings or the shadows of a genocide. It just feels like that because of turning off all these things, and I don't know however to describe it. It just, you take away Israel, Palestine, you take away Hamas, you take away all these labels and things, and you just put them as one human being doing it to another human being. I just don't see how it's right, and I guess that's a problem, that it's a very difficult situation in the West. They must be seeing these images. They must have heard exactly what I've heard. How can they then be so strongly behind Israel when, if this was happening to them, I don't think they would be feeling that way if it was the other way around, if they were the leaders of Palestine, say, and this was happening to their families and children. I don't know, it just, from a human level, you can take away the labels. From a human level, it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. Here's the next one.
Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. Just to update some numbers we're getting from the Palestinian authorities, they are now saying that 3,000 people are dead in Gaza. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is with me now. Let's talk then about the IDF saying that it might not necessarily be a ground invasion. What are their other options?
It's hard to know because Israel, from the top down, has said that their objective is to eliminate Hamas and change the Middle East, in Benjamin Netanyahu's words. I struggle to see how they can eliminate Hamas. Look, just as an aside, a lot of people say you'll never eliminate Hamas because the ideology will live on and reform in some other way. But if you're talking about the elimination of Hamas leadership and Hamas's military capability, I struggle to see how they'll do that without some sort of ground operation. Now, whether or not that is a full-scale push into Gaza with the 400,000 or 500,000 troops that are amassed, or whether it is something a little bit more refined where you use special forces to go in, acting on exact intelligence and carrying out limited operations, well, we'll wait and see. But I'm not sure how they achieved that very well-stated objective without some ground element to it.
Right, and President Biden coming in to try and avoid escalation. But today, warnings from Iran, growing tensions up there on the Lebanese border.
The Lebanese border over the last 48 hours has been particularly busy. There's been a lot of toing and froing of fire between Hezbollah and Israeli forces. At the moment, if you're looking for optimistic signs, it's been confined to the Lebanese border. It hasn't spread any further than that. It hasn't spread deeper into either country. And also, it is following the well-worked-through pattern of tit-for-tat. You hit one of our positions and don't kill anyone, we'll hit one of your positions and we won't kill anyone. You kill two of our fighters, we'll kill two of your soldiers. And so, as long as it remains like that, I think the Israelis and allies would accept that it's Hezbollah having their say without jumping into the fight with both feet.
Yeah, and just these reports that are coming in of these airstrikes in the south of Gaza, with the Israelis having told hundreds of thousands of people to move from the north. What do we know about that?
Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in a press conference about an hour ago with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and again reiterated that if Gazans want to be safe in the north, they need to move south. And yet, the reports coming out of Gaza, both through independent sources but our own team in Gaza, is that the likes of Khan Yunis, which is one of the major cities in the south, have been hit very hard today, which makes you wonder, you're seeing the pictures here, where is safe in Gaza, and are they providing misleading information to Gazans in the north to move south when they still have targets and objectives to carry out in the south?
Yeah, this is the city of Khan Yunis these pictures are from, which is in the south.
And for Gazans to move from the north, they have had to make the decision to leave their family homes and to move to a part of the territory that they're less familiar with, that they don't have guaranteed accommodation in. But they've done it, if they have done it, they've done it because they are following those Israeli orders in the hope that they will have safety for themselves and their families. And yet you see these pictures, and it suggests that that guarantee or that promise of safety is actually not accurate.
Something we can put to the Israel Defence Force when we speak to them in the next few minutes, hopefully. Alistair, thank you very much indeed. Well, earlier I travelled to the Palestine.
Okay, I'm going to go to that now. I think I have that with the IDF somewhere here. What's on the next one? Sorry, I think it was here. Yeah. Let's see if he brings out international law or not.
of the Strip. We can see from these pictures that it appears that attacks have continued in the south. Let's speak now to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who is a spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces. Thank you for being with us. Why have you asked hundreds of thousands of people to move from the north to the south, and you're continuing airstrikes in the south?
Mark, we are now in day 11 of our war against Hamas, a war that we didn't choose, but a war we are determined to win. Unfortunately, indeed, Hamas are operating in the civilian arena, and we need to operate against them. That is our obligation, to prevent them from conducting terrorist attacks against us. Of course, when I'm watching your show and watching what you're covering, and as a human being, the loss of innocent life, it troubles us and is of deep concern. But we do not seek to target or harm civilians, unlike Hamas, who does. Now, this is the very sad reality of this conflict. And I would say, Hamas, and I've said this to you, that Hamas has failed the people of Gaza miserably. And we have no choice but to fight against this terrorist organization. And it is the people of Israel, southern Israel, that were butchered and abducted into Gaza. And it is the people of Gaza that are paying because of this terrorist organization.
But we have a specific problem here, don't we, that you told the people to move from the north to the south. Now we are seeing bodies of men, women and children being taken out of rubble in buildings in Khan Yunis in the south there. You told them it would be safe. It is not. People are being killed.
Mark, we are fighting against a ruthless terrorist organization that operates within the civilian arena. We told people to go south precisely so that we can build and escalate our offensive against Hamas wherever they are operating, but specifically within Gaza City. And those operations are continuing and have continuing and will continue throughout the day. We are going out of our way to refrain and minimize the civilian casualties. And it is indeed an extremely challenging task, as you pointed out, with the density of the population in Gaza.
But Colonel, if the north is not... No, but Colonel, just hold on a second. If the north is not safe and the south is not safe, where is safe in Gaza?
Mark, it's not a question about the north not being safe. The north absolutely is not safe because we are increasing our activities. And if Hamas is operating and continuing to use the Gaza Strip in areas within the south, such as Khan Yunis, as a staging ground, as it was several times on the 7th of October, against the people of Israel, against the communities, against the military, then there will be consequences to this. You can't expect us not to protect our civilians because Hamas are hiding behind theirs. And indeed, we are in a huge effort in order to minimize the civilian consequences of this conflict. But, and I say this very sadly, there will, and it is unfortunate, and inevitable that this will continue to happen. If Hamas do not stop launching attacks from civilian population, we have no other option. Hamas is a terrorist organization that needs to be banished from the realm of existence. We are doing that. It is at a huge... But these people have moved south. They have moved south and they are suffering airstrikes. They are being taken to hospital, and they are hospitals which are struggling with the lack of fuel, the lack of water. The hospitals are being overwhelmed. Is there not a point, if you've got all these people now in the south, you have to end the blockade, let the water in, let the fuel in, let the medicines in at least? Mark, we are, and you know this, that the diplomacy is ongoing. We are fighting while the diplomats are doing their diplomacy. What if the IDF has received instructions to enforce a humanitarian hiatus or a humanitarian corridor? We will, until then, we will continue our fight. That is our responsibility. That is the directive that we have from our government. And I would say it is a really unfortunate situation, but we have no choice at this time. Yesterday, you reported about the UNRWA fuel and medication, medical supplies that were taken from the UNRWA compound. This goes to show the type of enemy we are facing. They have no regard, and it is indeed a very dire situation. Of course, with such a huge influx coming down south, there is going to be a stress, but it is a state of war
It's not a tit for tat as it was in the past.
Clearly.
It's a type of conflict.
Clearly. Why, can I just ask you this? Why are you bombing the Rafah crossing as well? Are there Hamas targets that you're trying to hit there?
We are not bombing the Rafah crossing. We are targeting specific, based on intelligence, targets, Hamas targets, the individuals that are involved, the individuals that have perpetrated attacks, the individuals that are planning, the individuals, the terrorists. I call them individuals, but I'm just giving them way too much credit. These terrorists have no regard for any human lives, Israeli or Palestinian. We are responsible for Israeli lives. We will defend them. And unfortunately, we are the only player in this arena that is trying to keep Palestinians out of harm's way.
Okay, just finally, you said, the IDF have said that there are other options to a ground invasion. Are you saying that you think you can achieve your objectives without a large ground invasion?
The IDF continues its preparations for ground offensive if the government instructs us to do so. We have recruited some 300,000 reservists, and indeed many of them are rallying on the border with Gaza. We've been training them and equipping them and tasking them with specific missions in order to destroy Hamas's infrastructure so that Hamas can never, ever target Israel again. Indeed, that is waiting on the government decision to mobilize, and if we are required to do so, we will.
Okay, Colonel Lerner, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much.
What worries me is the mindset. When he talks about, they're the only ones trying to protect Palestinians. I mean, I get it from the point of getting rid of terrorists, but not the children and the women that are getting blown up along with the terrorists. We're seeing lots of children, lots of them, more than what I think would be acceptable, with collateral damage. And that's why a lot of people are talking about, collective punishment, which is a war crime. I don't know, just the mindset of everyone talking about this, of, I guess everyone's mind is in the system mind and devoid of the truth that we're all human beings. But it doesn't look like anyone's really thinking about the innocent people, especially like the children who are definitely innocent, 100%. You can't argue that. The others, maybe we don't know whether they're behind or support, whatever, but children know. And they're dying on both sides. And that doesn't look right from, there is no justification from the terrorists or from the so-called democratic countries, peaceful countries, who don't want to target.
Well, earlier this week I spoke to Ehud Barak, a former Israeli Prime Minister and top general who has played a part in conflict and in attempted peace-making here for decades. Today I travelled to the Palestinian city of Ramallah in the West Bank, which is just over 10 miles north of here, and sat down with a veteran of the other side in all this, with Hanan Ashwari, who has been a leading figure in Palestinian politics for decades. In the occupied territory of the West Bank, there is a fearful uncertainty. Many here have family in Gaza, but that is not all. They know that all-out conflict there means the threat of increased violence here. It is already happening. These are tense, nervous days. We're here to see Hanan Ashrawi, the veteran politician and activist, and I began by asking whether she was shocked by the Hamas atrocities.
I was surprised, and the shock came later, but for many reasons. But what happened on October 7th was unprecedented in the sense that the Palestinians and Palestinian fighters came out, broke free of their prison, and were able to face the Israeli army, stand up to the Israeli army, and in many ways expose the myth of the army that cannot be defeated.
There was mass murder on a huge scale. 1,400 Israelis are killed. It was an act of
of terror. It was an act of brutal terror. They basically came over to murder as many civilians as they could.
You assign that as their motivation, that they just want to kill as many civilians. This, I know, is something that Israel has been doing to Gaza for decades. 5 assaults on Gaza. They killed 5,000 Palestinians before this 3,000 and some Palestinians killed. That's systematic state terror, because they kill long distance, because they don't have to look their victims in the eye. It's an active policy that is being implemented by the Israeli occupation, by the Israeli army, on Palestinian civilians.
But surely this was a deliberate act of mass murder.
This was a deliberate act of resisting an occupation army that has been surrounding Gaza, besieging Gaza, regularly bombing and shelling Gaza, killing civilians.
So it's justifiable, in your view?
I don't justify the killing of civilians, ever, but I justify your misrepresentation, because the mainstream media picked up the distortions and the narrative and the versions of Israel, even the lies that were disproven later.
But children were killed and families were killed in the most brutal way.
So this has been happening to Palestinians for decades. Where is your moral outrage? Why is it that you always ask the Palestinians to prove their moral fiber? Why is it that you extract whatever happened and you deal with it only by accusing the Palestinians? I think I would like, this sort of predisposition to think of the Palestinians as being guilty all along is part of a pattern.
Are you
That's
concerned?
Not the issue. I'm concerned.
Hanan, are you concerned what this will do to the Palestinian cause that you have fought for decades? Are you concerned what it will do to the Palestinian cause?
Of course I'm concerned. I'm concerned that this will be used again to label and malign the Palestinians. If you look at the occupation and what it's done, and if you look at the siege of Gaza, for 17 years, the people of Gaza has been in prison. They have had no hope. Regularly they're being shelled and killed. Food, water, land, whatever, that has been taken away. They've been treated like subhuman species. They've been denied their humanity and their rights.
Is it possible to wipe out Hamas? Israelis are talking about wiping out Hamas.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do that?
Shows you how much they know. They tried to do this before, and they killed civilians, and they bombed and shelled people's homes, and they destroyed and obliterated whole families the way they're doing now. Did it wipe out Hamas? They don't understand Hamas is a military and political organization. It has both wings. It has organizations, institutions. It has social welfare programs. It's not just a group of fighters who emerged out of nowhere. It's part of the political fabric. They ran for elections, for heaven's sake.
So you have been working for peace for many decades.
Yes.
Are we further away from peace now than we've ever been?
I think so, yes. I think that's a trajectory that has begun from the beginning. Even when we signed the Declaration of Principles and so on and the Oslo process, Israel maintained its policy of land confiscation, of building settlements, of targeting Palestinians. With this government,
Ehud Barak said to me that in 2000 they had the deal, they were very close to the deal, and Arafat rejected it and then returned very quickly to terror, were his words.
You want to go back to 2000?
I'm just saying what he said.
There are reports about, neutral reports about 2000. The Israelis did not in any way offer a deal. I asked them, I challenged them, give me a piece of paper that says what your deal was. They said, well, we want to have, you can have above ground Jerusalem, we'll have underground. We said Jerusalem is not an onion. They wanted to maintain control and annex large areas of, and it's all verbal, nothing in writing. Negotiations were ongoing. Suddenly, Ehud Barak asked, no, never.
Do you fear that there will be an explosion of violence as a result of what is happening in Gaza, on the West Bank, and in other areas?
There are already confrontations, and the violence is already taking place by the settlers and the Israeli army. And the people are terrified. There are areas that are being cleaned out because they're afraid, they're not protected. And because each town, city, and village is totally besieged and isolated, they have no protection. That's what scares me, is that there is violence, but it's happening in the dark, silently and quietly.
Is there, in your view, a way back from this?
There's no way back. You have to go forward. What we need is to see an end to the occupation, an end to the brutality, and I would like to see all parties commit to international law and international humanitarian law. Huh?
I don't know. It's just the way, like, when she talks about, she doesn't seem to see the idea of those people, the children that were killed and the hostages that were taken as civilian. I mean, irrespective of people, maybe, I don't know about what exactly kibbutz are and all this kind of thing, and this prison and border that they talk about, but irrespective of any of that, children being killed, burnt alive, taken, you can't not say they're civilians, you can't not say they're innocent, and you can't defend anyone doing that, whatever side, whatever tag we put on this person, whether Hamas, whether they're Israeli, whether they're Western, whatever the tag. People killing innocent children and torturing them and kidnapping them is never going to be right and never justifiable. And my worry is when you hear this from both sides, like I said, from Palestine and Israel, it just shows the mindset that they've been in this situation so long, they've forgotten to see each other as human beings. They've forgotten, each of them has the pain of losing their own children, their own people's children, but don't see it as for the other side. When children are children, humans are humans. I'll make another one of these, probably the last one. Take care, take it easy. God bless and peace.